Why do some people, no matter how talented, remain forever in the shadows? Why do certain voices that bring tears to our eyes so rarely get mentioned? This is the story of Erma Franklin, the raw truth about the cost of standing beside an icon. Aretha Franklin was worshipped by the world, but Irma forgotten, buried beneath her younger sister's dazzling light. There was bitterness, pain, and injustice that she carried to her final days. Yet all this time, no one has spoken of it. No one dared mention the resentment born from the shadow Aretha unknowingly cast. Until now, today. You'll hear the tale of what Irma endured bearing the same last name as Aretha, and it's not as glamorous as many might imagine. On March 13, 1938, in a small wooden house in Shelby, Mississippi, where cotton fields stretched to the horizon and gospel hymns were the only balm for weary souls, Erma Franklin let out her first cry. The firstborn of Reverend C.L. Franklin and Barbara Franklin. She was born into the simplicity of the American South, where poverty and faith walked hand in hand. C.L. Franklin, a father with a mesmerizing voice and a gift for stirring hearts, soon became the soul of church gatherings. Barbara, the gentle mother, never stopped singing gospel melodies while cradling her children. Music, from the time Irma lay in her cradle, seeped into her blood not through lessons, but through her mother's soft singing in their humble kitchen and the resonant power of her father's sermons. By 1943, the Franklin family left the South for Detroit, Michigan, a booming industrial hub. C.L. Franklin took the pulpit at New Bethel Baptist Church, a place not just for prayer but a vibrant stage for gospel music. Detroit marked a turning point for the family. Irma, only 6, became the lead voice in the church choir, standing out with a clear yet soulful tone. Though just a child, she won the hearts of the congregation, her singing seeming to light up the sanctuary. A few years later, a new star began to draw eyes: Aretha, her 3-year-old sister, who showed extraordinary musical gifts early on, though Irma still guided her siblings in choir rehearsals. C.L. Franklin's gaze increasingly turned to Aretha. Her natural talent was like a new beam of light, prompting whispers among the congregation about the child prodigy. While Irma loved her sister deeply, the shift in how their father and community viewed Aretha made her sense her own position slipping. She wasn't jealous, just vaguely aware of being replaced. By 1948, when Irma was 10, New Bethel had become a spiritual hub for a thriving community. C.L. Franklin's sermons were recorded and broadcast across America, and services grew grander, with music as their beating heart. Irma and her siblings became the Franklin Angels, regular fixtures in ceremonies. But attention increasingly focused on Aretha, now able to perform solos. The 6-year-old's voice stunned listeners with its emotional depth and rare power. Though the family moved to a middle-class Detroit neighborhood with a more comfortable life, the home's atmosphere began to shift. 1948 also marked a major blow. Barbara Franklin left the family after irreconcilable tensions with her husband. Her absence was a devastating shock. As the eldest, Irma had to take on caring for her siblings while their father grew busier with preaching tours. From then on, she not only felt the void of a motherless home, but faced her father's growing indifference to her role. C.L. Franklin's trips often included Aretha, not Irma. The big stages, where voices soared, seemed reserved for her little sister. Irma was still loved in the congregation, a reliable voice, but deep down, she knew things were changing, little by little. By 1952, at 14, Irma was a musical pillar in the church community. Her voice was not only pure but carried a depth of emotion distilled from years of loss and responsibility. She led the choir, coached her siblings in performances, and was seen as the spark that lit up every service. Yet, at that moment, Aretha was invited to record her first gospel album, an honor Irma had never touched. She found no answers, unsure if she'd gone wrong or if the starring role was never meant for her. The feeling of being overshadowed grew heavier. At school, Irma was no longer seen as an individual with unique talent, but simply Aretha's sister. In church, the congregation's focus tilted toward the younger girl with the captivating voice. Though Irma still sang and led the choir, her role shrank to a background supporter of a rising star. One summer day in 1953, as she prepared a solo she'd rehearsed for weeks, C.L. Franklin abruptly changed plans. He chose Aretha instead, saying she had greater appeal. Irma didn't protest. She quietly stepped off the platform, eyes dry but heart heavy. From that moment, the gap between her and her father, her and her sister, began to widen, along with a silent crack forming in her artistic dreams. Irma's greatest tragedy wasn't being overshadowed, but her silence. She didn't resent, didn't confess, didn't speak as pent-up emotions consumed her. Her love for family and music remained intact, but each time she stood backstage watching her sister celebrated, she felt herself fading, as if her existence was being swallowed by another's glow. By 1955, at 17, Irma was still a key figure in church activities, yet quietly. A burning desire stirred a longing to escape her family's shadow and shine on her own. By 1957, Irma was 19, fresh out of high school. While peers considered college or stable jobs, Irma craved one thing: music. Gospel was in her bones, but she wanted more to hear her voice on the radio, on big stages, where audiences didn't know her name or call her by someone else's. But that dream, though fierce, was always eclipsed by Aretha's towering shadow, the 15-year-old who'd signed a record deal and was hailed as a prodigy. Irma began her own path from a familiar place, New Bethel Church. Her voice remained powerful, profound, capable of giving chills with How Great Thou Art. Outside the church, though, things were tougher. In October that year, she secretly entered a music contest at a small Detroit club. Under dim lights and the bar's stuffy air, Irma sang a self-written soul song, her voice raw with silent wounds. The crowd cheered endlessly, but the prize went to another singer with flashier looks and stage presence. Irma didn't quit. She began to see that music demanded not just talent but luck, something she always felt she lacked. In 1959, her drive to prove herself led to a bold move. Hearing a small Chicago label was scouting new talent, Irma took a risk. On her 21st birthday, she boarded a cross-state bus with an old suitcase and undimmed dreams. In the studio, she poured her heart into 3 gospel tracks and 1 soul song. Producers nodded, but ultimately passed. They said her voice was good, but not distinct enough to stand out among rising stars, including Aretha. Leaving the studio, Irma stood still in the drizzle, tears mixing with cold rain. She couldn't imagine this was just the start of years of disappointment. While Irma tirelessly chased opportunities, Aretha soared. In June 1960, the 18-year-old signed with Columbia Records, a major industry player, and began recording not just gospel but pop and R&B. News of Aretha flooded Detroit papers, and her voice filled the radio, sweet yet sharp, a constant echo reminding Irma she was falling behind. C.L. Franklin threw a party to celebrate Aretha's success, inviting music industry heavyweights. Irma stood in a corner, watching her sister shine amid the crowd. No one asked about her. No one wondered what she was dreaming of. To them, she was still Irma, but not an artist, just Aretha's sister. April 1961 marked a pivotal moment for Irma. A family friend connected her with Epic Records, a respected label. When invited to audition, Irma could hardly believe her sudden luck. She entered Epic's New York studio with a racing heart, singing "Don't Cry, Baby," an R&B track brimming with longing. Her voice filled the room, stilling the air. Impressed, Epic signed her that day, back in Detroit. She shared her joy with her stepmother, believing this was the start of a brilliant journey. In her heart, escaping Aretha's shadow felt within reach. All of 1961, Irma poured herself into her debut album. Her name is Irma. She carefully chose R&B and soul songs delving into separation, loneliness, and silent loss pains she'd lived through. The album was completed early 1962 and released February 10th. She hoped her music would flood airwaves, that the public would embrace her as a fresh soul voice. But reality crushed her expectations. Despite Epic's size, they lacked a clear plan to promote an R&B artist. The album wasn't sent to radio stations, had no promotional support or performances. It never charted, selling only a handful of copies. Newspapers buzzed with Aretha's name, while Irma faded into obscurity. The failure cut deep into her pride. In March 1962, when Epic declined to renew her contract, Irma just nodded silently. No complaints, just an overwhelming emptiness. Back in Detroit, She faced growing indifference from her family. Her father focused entirely on Aretha's rising career. In the prolonged silence, Irma began doubting herself. Looking in the mirror, she saw a weary face, eyes shadowed, yet clung to the belief that it wasn't over. In July that year, Irma tried again, but differently. She joined Lloyd Price, famous for personality, as a backup singer. It wasn't a starring role, but kept her tied to music. For years, she quietly toured with Price across America, from Chicago to Atlanta, standing backstage, harmonizing for songs not her own. She smiled for audiences, but felt her heart sink each time applause rang for someone else. She told herself it was temporary, that her turn would come. But 4 years passed, and the supporting role became a lingering fate, her solo dreams slipping further away. Meanwhile, Aretha's career skyrocketed. In November 1966, she signed with Atlantic Records and prepared I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You, the album that crowned her Queen of Soul. Hearing the news, Irma felt pride tinged with pain. Watching her sister shine on stage, belting respect to roaring crowds, she felt the gap between them not just on stage but in life. She clapped, but inside was an unnameable void. Early 1967 brought an unexpected chance. Irma was introduced to Shout Records, a small but passionate soul label founded by Burt Burns. Her first performance captivated him. He believed her voice could touch the soul's depths. On February 15th, she signed with Shout, carrying hopes of a fresh start. Her first recording was Piece of My Heart, a fierce soul track that seemed written from her hidden struggles. In every line, Irma didn't just showcase skill but bared her soul, telling her story of battling oblivion and despair. Across the control room, Burns barely hid his excitement. He was sure this song could change her life. For the first time in years, Irma felt like she was stepping into the light. A new belief took root in her heart. Recording stretched over weeks. Irma worked with intense focus, refining every detail, from vocal runs to the breath at each line's end. Burns stayed close, pushing her to dig into her emotions. To him, Piece of My Heart wasn't just a song, it was a declaration of a forgotten voice's existence. On April 6, 1967, the single dropped. In her small Detroit apartment, Irma heard her voice on FM radio. As the familiar sound filled the air, tears streamed down her face. This time, she truly believed a miracle was beginning. Initially, Piece of My Heart made waves. It hit the R&B charts on May 1, 1967, peaking at number 62, a modest achievement, but enough to spark hope in Irma. Some Detroit and Chicago stations added it to playlists. Listeners called in, demanding the fiery voice again. In June, she was invited to perform at a Harlem, New York club. Irma took the stage, singing Piece of My Heart to hundreds. As the final notes faded, the room erupted in a standing ovation. In that moment, she felt free from her family's shadow, believing this would launch a path where she was no longer Aretha's sister. But fate, with its cruel twists, didn't let Irma bask in the light long. By October, Burt Burns, Shout's founder and her biggest believer, showed signs of decline. He coughed often, paused during sessions, his face pale, hands trembling with pain. Though Irma sensed trouble, Burns stayed upbeat, masking the severity. On December 20th, tragedy struck. He died suddenly of heart failure in his label's office, at 38. The next morning, Irma got the news from his assistant, and her world seemed to collapse. The man who gave her faith and a chance was gone. Burns's death marked not just an emotional blow but the collapse of her budding career. Shout Records, reliant on his vision and clout, fell into chaos. Promotion for Piece of My Heart halted. No more gigs, no interviews, no further singles sent out. The song faded from view. Early 1968, Irma tried contacting the label to salvage things, but their curt reply revealed they were near bankruptcy and couldn't support her. She felt her dream, once within reach, dissolve like smoke. But the deepest pain was yet to come. One quiet August afternoon in 1968, Irma turned on the radio and heard Piece of My Heart, but not her voice. It was Janis Joplin's, a white rock singer rising fast. Joplin's raw, raspy take made the song a national hit, reaching number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 by September. Blasting from bars, TVs, and major stages, fans raved, hailing Joplin as a soul icon. Irma froze, not resenting Joplin the song. After all, wasn't hers forever. What broke her was the silence around her original. No one mentioned her. No one recalled she'd first breathed life into it. She tried reaching out to media, hoping to share her story, but attention fixated on the market's hot name. Worse, whispers spread among friends and industry folks. They said she'd missed her shot, that she couldn't compete with Aretha or Joplin. Some even told her to be proud her song was revived, but all Irma felt was loss of identity, of a chance to prove herself. Meanwhile, Aretha kept conquering peaks. In October 1968, she released Aretha Now, solidifying her Queen of Soul title. Irma quietly attended a Chicago concert, sitting in the back, watching Aretha perform Chain of Fools with magnetic energy. The crowd roared. Irma clapped, but felt only emptiness. She wondered if Aretha knew her sister was in crisis. Though Aretha once offered help, it never materialized. Irma left the show early, avoiding her sister. She didn't want hollow comforts. By December, Irma sank into depression. She barely left home, stopped singing, and drifted from New Bethel Church, once her spiritual anchor. Her Piece of My Heart records gathered dust in a corner. She tormented herself with questions: where had she gone wrong? Wasn't her voice, her talent, enough for success? Each attempt to rise seemed to drag her down. Thoughts of giving up crept in, making her question her very existence. Yet Irma was never one to stay defeated. In early 1969, she resolved to start anew. She contacted small producers, seeking new recording chances. Some agreed to meet. But learning she was Aretha's sister changed their demeanor. Most wanted a star, not a shadow carrying comparison's weight. Still, Irma persisted. In May, she sang backup for artists like Solomon Burke. The work wasn't artistically fulfilling, but kept her tied to music and paid the bills. Deep down, she believed one more chance, one song, one deal could prove she deserved to be heard. Early 1970 brought a new glimmer of hope. Aretha, now at fame's peak, offered to produce an album for Irma under Brunswick Records. The sisters talked in the cozy Franklin family living room, envisioning a project true to Irma's voice. Aretha promised to pick songs perfect for Irma's style, backed by top musicians. Irma listened quietly, her heart swelling. After years on the sidelines, she felt this could be her shot to shine, no longer in her sister's shadow. She dove into rehearsals, chose songs, and prepped for a comeback. But fate, as always, struck cruelly. In August 1971, King Curtis, a talented producer, Aretha's close friend, and key to Irma's relaunch, was murdered outside his New York apartment. His sudden death crushed Aretha. In shock and grief, she canceled all plans, retreating from public life, derailing the unfinished project. Irma got the news days later via a brief call from a manager. She sat motionless in her quiet room, heartbreak overwhelming. Once again, her artistic path was blocked by events beyond her fault, as if fate mocked every hope she dared to hold. Curtis's death and the Brunswick Project's collapse were like a final blade severing her tie to her musical dreams. Exhausted by futile efforts, worn by failures not from lack of talent, but relentless, harsh circumstances, Irma wondered if there was any reason to keep trying when the world seemed set on ignoring her voice. From October 1971, she withdrew from the spotlight. No more backup gigs, no interest in small events. Even New Bethel Church, where her musical journey began, felt alien. Congregants asked after her, showed concern, but she dodged them. She feared their pitying looks, questions about Aretha, or repetitive, empty encouragement. Her father's silence widened the family rift. Though still a father, he was consumed by Aretha's fame and community projects. When he rarely suggested she rejoin the choir, Irma refused, marking the first time she asserted her own choice. She left that day feeling both relieved and hollow. In 1972, Irma sought solace in her personal life. She married Thomas Garrett, a reserved construction worker unconnected to music, who listened to her tales of bygone days. They had a simple Detroit wedding in late March, in a modest gown. Irma smiled beside a husband who loved her unconditionally. Thomas placed no expectations on her, never compared her to her famous sister, making her feel accepted like never before. Yet this quiet joy couldn't heal her silent wounds. Hearing Aretha on the radio, seeing her name in papers, or catching a mention of the Queen of Soul still stung Irma's heart. It wasn't envy, but a deep sorrow for being forgotten. In June 1973, Irma gave birth to her daughter, Sabrina. Motherhood brought a new purpose. She spent most days at home, caring for her child, singing gospel lullabies from her own childhood. But each note stirred memories of stages, lights, and cheering crowds now just echoes. Though she tried to bury those thoughts, they crept back like an indelible ache. Thomas saw the sadness in her eyes but couldn't soothe it. Once, he suggested she try recording again, but Irma shook her head. By 1975, Irma entered her darkest, quietest phase. She began drinking more not to get drunk, but to dull the lingering sense of failure. Late nights, after Sabrina slept, she sat alone in the living room, letting the radio play Aretha's latest hits. Amazing Grace, released in 1972, was a phenomenon, selling millions and cementing Aretha's unshakable status. Irma felt pride but also choked up, as if each of Aretha's triumphs pushed her further into the background. In those moments, she blamed no one but couldn't escape the bitterness was fate truly set to allow only one star in the Franklin family. In February 1976, Irma took a new path. After years of silent pain and endless comparisons, she applied for an administrative job at IBM, a renowned tech giant. She was quickly hired. For the first time in ages, she felt a faint hope not for stage lights, but for a stable, peaceful life. On April 1st, she started, learning to navigate massive computers and process data. The work, though dry and far from her artistic past, brought a calm she'd never known, a space free from whispers about Aretha or pitying glances. By 1978, Irma had nearly severed ties with the music world. She declined all performance offers, even for church or casual events. Once, an old producer proposed recording a new gospel track. She politely refused, saying she was content with her current life, but after hanging up, she sat still, tears falling uncontrollably. It wasn't just abandoning a career, but rejecting the part of herself that once believed her voice could conquer the world. In July 1979, a grave family crisis struck. Irma's father was shot during a robbery at home and fell into a coma. The family plunged into grief and chaos, especially Irma. It wasn't just about losing her father, but the accumulated disappointment of a life spent striving to make him proud, only to remain eclipsed by her sister's vast shadow. By 1980, Irma's life at IBM settled into a rhythm. Promoted to team manager, she earned colleagues' respect for her dedication and calm. Most of her time went to family, driving Sabrina around, cooking dinner, maintaining a quiet life like countless other women. Her world now revolved around her small home, but that happiness didn't last. Early 1985, a persistent sore throat began plaguing Irma. At first, she dismissed it as a cold, a bit of ginger tea, a few days' rest, and it'd pass. She kept up her IBM work, striving for normalcy. But the pain lingered for months. Irma sought a doctor, expecting a quick fix. The test results delivered a blow: early-stage throat cancer, for someone who'd lived through her voice. The news was a silent sentence. The voice that once hushed New Bethel, that convinced Burt Burns of a bright future, was now at risk. Irma chose silence. She told neither Thomas nor her family, keeping it from the public entirely. She dreaded pity, feared being reduced again to Aretha Franklin's sick sister. To hide it, she went to work daily, masking exhaustion with professional smiles. Meanwhile, Aretha kept climbing. In November 1985, her album Who's Zoomin' Who topped charts. Aretha knew nothing of Irma's illness, as she never shared it. Irma feared burdening her sister or sparking pity, so she withdrew, dodging calls, declining family event invites. Claims of being busy were excuses. Deep down, she lacked the strength to face Aretha's radiant glow, where she was just a faint memory. By 1988, her condition worsened. Irma began grueling chemotherapy, painful and draining. It ravaged her body, hair fell out. Her voice weakened until she barely recognized it. Thomas stayed by her side, holding her hand. But some losses couldn't be shared. In June 1990, her health improved slightly, though doctors warned of relapse risks. She returned to IBM, pouring herself into rebuilding a normal life. Promoted again, loved by colleagues, she seemed to forge a new image: resilient, strong. But each day left an emptiness. She was no longer Erma Franklin. the dreamer who'd aimed to sing for the world. Now, she was a wife, mother, diligent worker, worthy roles, but they couldn't fill the artist's void in her soul. Then, in February 1992, a miracle happened. An old industry friend called, saying her long-forgotten Piece of My Heart was picked for a Levi's ad in Europe. The song became a hit, cracking the UK top 10. Irma gave a bittersweet smile. Then she cried, not from regret, but because the world finally listened, yet the woman they heard was no longer her. She'd left music, closed her dream. The recognition, though sweet, was a painful reminder of what never fully formed, due to a life of too many rough turns. Late that year, Irma's health declined again. Her cancer returned, fiercer than before. She hid it, telling no one, not even Thomas or Sabrina. She went to work as usual, tackling tasks with familiar diligence, but her body weakened daily. Her throat burned, breathing grew labored, her voice rasped. Fate seemed intent on stripping her last treasure, her voice. She knew she was nearing the end, but chose silence. No pity, no attention needed. She'd lived quietly and wanted to leave the same way. By July 1994, Irma had to quit work, her body unable to cope. She cited recovery time, but couldn't keep pretending. A new chemo round began in August, but hope was slimmer than ever. The cancer had spread, prognosis grim. Knowing this, she stayed silent. She didn't want Aretha seeing her fade. She feared her sister's concern would deepen her sense of inadequacy. Amid losses and unclaimed dreams, she clung to her last shred of pride. Even in silence, she wanted no spotlight, no tragic headlines. Her only wish was peaceful days with family, but even that simple hope felt distant as each breath became a struggle. By June 2001, her situation grew hopeless. Final treatments failed. Doctors could only ease her pain, facing the news. Irma wasn't afraid. Instead, she accepted it with a calm that broke Thomas and Sabrina's hearts. She began tying up loose ends, writing letters to her daughter, giving Thomas instructions for the future. She didn't mention music, Aretha, or New Bethel Sanctuary where she first sang. She wanted to end her journey gently, as she'd lived. In September 2002, Irma sensed the end nearing. She lay quietly in her hospital bed, eyes tracing golden leaves falling outside her window. On September 7th, Erma Franklin took her last breath, held by Thomas and Sabrina. She passed in silence. Only a few Detroit papers ran brief notices, calling her Aretha Franklin's sister, dead of cancer, even in her final moment. Her sister's shadow cloaked her identity. Irma never resented Aretha, but those who knew her felt the injustice while Aretha was globally revered. Irma, who stood by her from the start, was forgotten, though not widely remembered. Irma's legacy never fully vanished. Years later, soul music fans rediscovered Piece of My Heart, noting the raw, real fire in her voice that later covers couldn't match. Music scholars called her a forgotten gem of soul, but these praises came too late for her to hear. Irma lived a life of great dreams but greater obstacles, a journey of a woman striving to exist amid invisible pressures and time's cruel indifference. Irma's greatest tragedy wasn't just career failure, but a life defined through another's lens. She battled not only music's harsh industry, but her own family from childhood at New Bethel, where her father pinned hopes on Aretha, to adulthood unable to escape comparisons. Even after leaving music, working at IBM, and facing a deadly illness quietly, she couldn't shed the Aretha's sister label. Irma's story is a lament for a talent unheard in its time, a woman who lived fully for her passion but was never truly seen. Born with a voice to move souls, she was overshadowed by her sister's brilliance, yet in every note of Piece of My Heart, in every surviving gospel track, Irma left a piece of her heart, a fragment of an unfulfilled dream, a voice that never stopped yearning to be heard, to be recognized, even as the world only glanced back when it was far too late.